Welcome to another episode of Breaking Into Cybersecurity. Today we have Jonathan who's joining us on CISO Thursday. But before we go into him, if you are following us on LinkedIn, please follow myself, the podcast, and Jonathan. If you're following us on YouTube, hit that subscribe and notification button. That way we pop up the next time we're on. And then if you're following us after the fact on your favorite podcast platform, please give us a 10-star rating or 5 if that's all you can, and share with all your friends and family. Jonathan, welcome to the podcast. You want to give us a little overview of your background so that our listeners can understand where you're coming from?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Chris. And I'm really glad to be here. Thanks for having me on the show. Hi, everybody. My name is Jonathan Waldrop. I've been in IT and in security for many years, and IT for a bit longer. And then over the past 6 or 8 years or so, I've really started to focus in on cybersecurity. But really, in my current role in the past 5 years, I've really had a laser focus on security, and really pulling in the experiences I've had as an IT user, as a customer, but then also as a provider on how do we really create security? How do we build these environments, build the relationships to have security across the enterprise? I got my start in the military. I was in the Air Force active duty for several years, doing a few different types of things that are, everything from computers to radios and navigation equipment for aircraft, and had a lot of awesome experience there. And as I progressed through my career, ended up deciding to leave active duty, and I'm sure we'll talk more about this as time goes on. But I joined the reserves, in the Air Force Reserve, and specifically, that's really where I kind of kickstarted into a bit more of the technical background that I've developed over the years in security, specifically. Again, protecting networks. How do we, the best way to the good a good offense is a good defense type thing, right? And so how do we best protect our environment, but understanding how the bad guys are working. And so that's a little bit about me. I'm active here on LinkedIn. Please feel free to follow me or connect if you like. That's great. Happy to do that. And really, I'm just glad to take a few minutes to talk through my experience. Hopefully, that's useful to somebody, and always glad to build new relationships and meet new folks on these types of platforms.
Wow, what a interesting background, and definitely want to dive into your military experience as well as your reserve duty, because one of the things, not just this podcast, but there's a lot of individuals transitioning from the military and looking to IT or cybersecurity as a potential next journey for them. And one of the organizations that I help support is the Whole Cyberhuman Initiative. And there, what we do is we work with them to highlight the transferable skills that they gain in their previous lives and show how that relates to future roles. So, as you transitioned out, describe your experience and how you landed where you landed.
Yeah, so I started, like I said, I had a bit of a background in IT. In the Air Force, we called it communications and information. So really, computers and networks and radios and any way you communicate. And then later on, as the career as cybersecurity developed, really as a real thing, right? The Air Force added cyberspace as an actual domain that we fight in, right? So including air, land, and sea, and now cyberspace, of course. And so that really transformed our career field to not just being, a support desk, hey, the email's broken type of an issue, and really on the more leading edge of how are we actively protecting our environment? How are we actively keeping bad guys out? And then using that. The cyber warfare is a real thing. Unfortunately, right? That's just the world in which we live in, because it's accessible. It's accessible to everybody, right? Prior to the cyber domain, you had to have a bunch of money to go build a plane or build a ship, that type thing. But now, anybody can be a cyber criminal, and it really changes the landscape of how we prevent and detect, and then respond to those types of events. Um, but getting back to my background, how I kind of happened into it, I moved into the reserves in about the 2013 timeframe. And at that time, again, cyber was still emerging as in enterprise organizations and smaller companies where, yeah, well, we do security, we have passwords kind of thing. And it was a point in my career where I really looked to see, peered into the little bit of a crystal ball that I have, right, that I think I have anyway. And I said, hey, security is going to be a really big thing, and I think it's going to be interesting. I had a little bit of a technical background, and honestly, I just kind of took a leap of faith and said, "This is kind of cool. Seems like it's going to have some job security." And it's really become that. That really started kindling that passion of mine, that the security is everybody's responsibility. Um, we all have a duty to protect information, especially when we're handling it for other people. So that's kind of what got me into it. But definitely, again, protecting people's information that can't protect it themselves. That is something I try to drive as a practitioner, with everybody I work with, whether you're in HR, in the service desk, on the security team, in sales, right? All these kinds of different organizations that have to use security. We as practitioners really need to make it accessible to them, and that's how we do that. We build those relationships. We understand what their needs are in security. Everybody's need is going to be a little bit different depending on your perspective. And so that's one of the cool things I like about security, being able to touch all of those different parts of the organization.
And as you transitioned out, did you find the first role that you were looking for in a quick fashion, or what was that experience like?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in the reserve, I was able to pick the position that I went into. Unfortunately, was hired into basically a network operations security unit, and so got a lot of experience there. They sent me to several months of training. And I really credit the. It didn't mean this to be an Air Force Reserve commercial, but I really do credit the Air Force and the military for building a lot of that skill, and those absolutely transferred directly over. Part of the training was some commercial certifications that I've held and continue to maintain. So there's obviously transferable skill in the cyber community, but even when you think about non cyber, non IT roles in the military, there are a lot of transferable skills along, just following guidance, like following procedure. You've got to be able to take something that's written down in rules. Everybody has their regulations and kind of laws and rules of how you do business, whether that's as a aircraft mechanic or you're doing paperwork for uh, managing career fields, managing paperwork, all that kind of stuff. The attention to detail that those positions require, especially in the military when it's such a high consequence environment, that attention to detail is something that really translates well over to the cyber realm. um, I mean, just in my experience over the past several years, I've worked with people who have been former airline pilots, different types, even non-military, that have come to the cyber world. um, I've worked with aircraft mechanics and infantrymen and women, and all sorts of people that really bring their experience and expertise. And again, I think that's one of the really amazing things about security is that everybody has an experience securing something, whether that's your personal data, and that really translates in some of the military skills that were taught around discipline, and following directions, but then also knowing when, hey, you know what? Here's what the rule book says. Here's what the procedure says, but things have evolved since then, and so we need to do the smart thing, and really take calculated risks when appropriate. And so that's something else. You don't always have a playbook in the service, and we don't always have a playbook in security. Sometimes it's kind of gut feel. Sometimes you maybe have a good plan or procedure, but it's something that sometimes honestly you just kind of do it on the fly and hope it works out based on your experience.
Wow. One of our viewers is saying, David from over on LinkedIn, thank you for following us today, that you have a very interesting background. And I wanted to dive a little bit into that. So you remain in active reserves today, and I see that you continue to do some very interesting things there. How do you balance the national security perspective and the private sector perspective that well?
That's an interesting question. And so it's one that I've um, kind of debated back and forth, right? So doing cybersecurity in the government and the military space is so very different from a corporate enterprise, right? In my current role, I handle a lot of things from perimeter defense to security awareness training for employees, and detection and response and incident response and all these different areas of security that you would think of when you think of a company. The Department of Defense and the government in general is so incredibly large, and the networks and the environment that we're working in with different classification levels, it is so complicated, and one team can't handle everything, and so you really have these you develop these areas of specialization across different organizations, and that's where it really becomes critical to understanding a little bit. You've got to understand about how other people are interacting with you, but you've really got to have a lot of depth in your role, and it's not uncommon or not too dissimilar rather from large enterprise companies. Think any company in the Fortune 50 type frame, where they've got a global enterprise, they've got networks upon networks, and they've got different people managing different parts of it. They've got to have that orchestration level. So at a small business or medium-sized business, it certainly is complicated, and it kind of falls into the jack of all trades in many cases. And then hopefully you have some expertise here and there, but it's a bit different. Some of the core fundamentals and kind of the theory of how cybersecurity works and what we're doing here is similar. Um, and that's how the skills really transfer over. But as far as can I pick up something that I am doing in my reserve world and translate it directly into my day job? And maybe there's a nugget here or there, but it's a bit different too. There's a lot of policy, there's a lot of red tape, right? The government is what it is. And there are a lot of rules for some good reasons. Sometimes they may not be such a good reason, but they're there for a purpose. So we've got to understand those. And so it is a bit of a different world, but it's a lot of fun. It kind of keeps me grounded in both, and certainly drives a different perspective when it comes to that.
Wow. We have Stephen saying the military as a whole is really prepared service members with great soft skills and technical skills that could be used in the cybersecurity space. Validating those IT skills with certifications are a winning combination. So, as a leader, what do you look for in those that are transitioning to cybersecurity, whether from the military sector or from another sector in the civilian world?
Yeah, that's a great question, and one that we get a lot as practitioners, right? How do we grow the people that are wanting to come into cybersecurity? Because we certainly need more help. There's a lot of companies out there that are hiring, a lot of open positions, and we need really smart folks. I think the first thing that you look for is drive and passion in that area. And one of the, without giving too many secrets away, one of the questions I always ask in interviews is, why do you want to do security? And in those, I'm always looking for more of an answer than, oh, I just want to learn how to hack stuff, right? Oh, I want to do that, right? I want to do the cool stuff, right? Well, why? What about it is interesting to you? Is it finding out how things break? Is it for me, it's really, how are we going to protect data? How are we going to protect employee data, customer data, client data, personal information, health information? When you think about it, you've got all kinds of data that's spanning your environment. And so all that comes back to is really looking at, why do you want, what about security is really interesting to you? And then it gets into, what do you know about security, right? Not as a barrier to entry, but what parts are interesting, right? Pen testing and incident response get a lot of attention, and they're very cool parts of security. There, you could stay really busy there, but there's also a lot of interesting places in security that don't require you to be able to decode packets and break down TCP headers and things like that, right? There's GRC work, governance, risk, and compliance, where you're talking about what risk does this present to our organization? How much could that cost? Can we translate it into dollars? And what's the likelihood of that, right? So there's a bit of almost a little financial element there, which is really interesting. So again, it's a wide-ranging background. Um, but getting back to what else you look for in those individuals. Certainly, if you've got technical skill, that's great. There's a lot of great people on this platform, on LinkedIn, on YouTube, that have awesome videos out there, and you can learn things about different parts of technology. A lot of the major players have free lab environments for somebody that's learning, right? Cloud environments and so forth. And so there's a lot of ways you can get involved. You can even set up your own laptop, and I've done this before, where you set up a dual boot Windows machine, an old laptop, and run Linux on it, right? And different types of Linux that you can learn, some of those technical skills. And then there's great podcasts that you can listen to, and other shows like this, where you're hearing directly from security practitioners and what they're experiencing day to day. And I also think it's real important to find mentors, right? Who's guiding you in that path? And do you have a really trusted individual that can help guide you, maybe that's been there before, hopefully, and can help, you know, ask some good thought provoking questions around why you want to do this, and what's the end state, right? So a lot of ways to get into security, and hopefully we can start breaking down a lot of those barriers, and really open up the industry to a lot of amazing talent that's out there just waiting to be tapped.
You spoke a lot about some non-resume or non-formal education ways of getting into the industry. How do you work with HR, recruiting, your other talent management divisions to find the diamond in the rough, to find those folks that are doing these things that might not have properly displayed that on a resume, not made it through the ATS system?
Yeah. So I think having a great network is really key there. You can bypass in some cases some of those applicant tracking systems. But I also think if you've got a technical skill, you should have a skills section on your resume, I think. And where you have, thanks, Gary, appreciate the comments there. Um, where you've got something you're doing at home, something you've learned, you should definitely put that on your resume. Whether it was volunteer, right? There's Cyber Patriot, which is it's kind of like a robotics club except focused on cybersecurity. That's a many high schools, all those types of environments where you can volunteer that service. That is an excellent thing that you should absolutely include on your resume, especially if you're early career. So there's let me think. There's a lot of ways you can do that. It doesn't have to be a paid for engagement that you're being paid to consult, or
Mhm.
even an employee, where that's relevant skill. And also on the job descriptions, when it does talk about your sometimes they have a requirement section that says, oh, a 4-year degree or equivalent experience, right? So that equivalent experience is your ticket in. And it's becoming more and more of the norm where you're recommended to apply for a job even if you don't meet all the requirements, right? Even if you can't check all the boxes, if you can check most of them or several of them, absolutely toss your name out there. Use your network to find somebody in that organization or in a similar role that could possibly help you dig in there.
If you're applying I use the 80-20 rule, or the 70-30 rule, where if you check 70 to 80% of those requirements, go ahead and apply. That way you have some room to grow. How
Absolutely.
how do you ensure that you get to the list? Networking is the only way, or what other tips would you get to ensure that you get to that interview?
Yeah. Again, I'll harp on your network, right? If you have a connection that knows the hiring manager or knows somebody on that team, absolutely, that's a great place to get your name in the door. I also think your how you present yourself. If you come across as confident, right, that's a huge element, versus somebody coming in timid, right? Security team is can be really intense. And you're going to deal with some big personalities, whether you're dealing with line level employees, frontline workers, or if you're dealing with executives in the boardroom type thing. And so you got to be able to carry yourself, and you got to be able to present yourself really, really well. So that's a skill that you can really practice. Sometimes it comes naturally to people. Some people have to work at it over a long period of time. Um, I think other ways to get in the door are, again, some of the independent training you can do, some of the independent learning. But then also, if you've been you hear stories about people, oh, I'm trying to get into a SOC analyst position. I've been applying for hundreds of positions maybe, and never gotten an interview. Then maybe try a different route. Maybe you try the service desk. If you're in, HR, and you want to move to cybersecurity, then reach out to your security team at your company and say, hey, my end goal is to get to the security team. How can I help you do security from my position in HR? Like we talked about, there's every organization in your business leverages security somehow. and your security team can really develop what we call champions. We call them security champions, and we've got them across IT. We're developing the program across all other elements of our organization, and it could be your go-to person. Maybe they're in a pilot group where hopefully you've already got MFA rolled out. If you haven't, please do that. But when you're setting up those kinds of projects, you want to roll that out slowly to make sure you're not going to break anything. Have those individuals in those pilot groups that get some exposure and experience. And then when your security team has an opening to fill, guess what? They're going to think about you probably at the top of their list. Hey, this person in HR is really, really hard charging. They're smart. They've helped us out. Let's at least have an interview with them and talk to them. I think that's an underestimated way of moving into security, especially if you're already at work in an organization and not on the security team.
And as a leader, how do you promote or ensure that there's that pipeline of internal mobility across the organization?
Yeah, that's a great question too. You want to look at, especially during the interview process, that's a good question to ask is, okay, on your website, you say you promote within. Tell me about the last person that came in, early career or even mid-career and promoted to the next level, either they're like a principal engineer or a lead role or supervisory role or even a team manager, right? Tell me about that experience. And that's a good way to really test if the company is walking the talk, if they can meet that, right? Um, I think you can also ask other individuals in that organization. How does that actually going to work? And then to build that, you really want to have a clear understanding from the hiring manager on what those actual requirements are. What do you need to see from me? You want to have really clear and candid feedback sessions on uh, you know what are the expectations of this role? What can I start doing in my current role that's going to demonstrate to you that I have the potential to do this in a full-time, type of capacity? So really, those kind of clear and very candid conversations are really important. And that's something I think everybody needs to be better at. I think a lot of us tend to shy away from having very frank conversations. And there's nothing wrong with it, right? As long as you're polite about it, you're nice about it, you're not going to try to insult somebody. I think, and it's a skill to receive and deliver that type of feedback, and that's something I think we can all work on as individuals and coworkers.
Okay. And so you're scanning through resumes. Do you have a preference for a length of a resume, 1 page, 2 pages, 20 pages?
Definitely not 20, hopefully. um, I think 2 pages is probably a good length if it spills over into a third, right? So it's a little bit different now that you're applying and posting your resume online somewhere than it was, 20, 30 years ago when you're actually carrying your resume into a company and saying, "Hi, I'm Jonathan. I'd like to apply for a job that you posted in the newspaper." Right? So I think it's a little bit different now. 3 pages is probably okay, for somebody who's got a lot of experience or maybe varied experience. Um, but I think I would probably limit it to the past 8 to 10 years of experience there. You certainly don't want to go on too long. Now, I will also say if you're looking at federal jobs, the federal resume is a whole different beast. I mean, resumes are everybody's got their own opinion on what a good one looks like. The federal resume is way out there. Honestly, it's a little bit difficult in some cases, but so in this case, just talking about private industry resumes. But yeah, it's that's the good thing and the bad thing, right? There's a many number of ways to write a good resume, and there are just as equally number of ways to write a bad one. So
Okay. A question from Whole Cyberhuman Initiative. For new or aspiring folks, how does leadership view those who write white papers or blogs about their tech journey and their knowledge?
yeah, that's a great question. Thanks for asking that one. I think again, going back to how are you presenting yourself? If you've posted videos, if you've done work like that, um, don't expect to send the link to that 30-page blog on how you decrypted some ransomware variant, right? Okay. People aren't going to go read that, so you need a cool way to distill that into maybe it's a LinkedIn video that you have a couple of talking points and you can talk through that. Hey, if you want to hear more, click the link in the comments. There you go. And so that's a great way to show your depth of knowledge in that area, but also be able to distill it down into, the I've seen one form of writing where it's communication from different, government or whatever, and says, hey, here's the 1,000 word explanation of what happened. Here's the 100 word explanation of what happened, and here's the 5 word or the 10 word explanation. And so being able to take that huge concept and really bubble it down versus bubble it up, but really distill it down into a couple of comments is a really good skill to have. As a practitioner, you're going to need to security practitioner, you're going to need to learn how to take a really complex topic and explain it to somebody that doesn't know anything about technology. And so that is a huge skill to have. And so there are a lot of ways, just like that, where you can post a video or turn your blog post into a small short post on LinkedIn or any other platform.
So it sounds like communication, analysis, and even marketing is
Yeah.
such a valuable skill within the industry to get hired as well as to get your message across.
For sure, absolutely. Communication is so key, and I think as technical people, a lot of us are. We get a bad rap of talking in bits and bytes and acronyms and all these kinds of things that. I was actually on a call the other day, and we were talking about how to solve this problem for mail that was impacting one of our customer groups, and they said we have no idea what you just said. I said, okay, sorry about that. For first of all, I didn't mean to talk over your head. We'll take this off the side. We'll figure out the technical bits, and we'll come back to you with the plan on how we're going to fix it going forward. And so, in some cases, that's really intimidating to people that don't understand what you're talking about. And so, you definitely want to cultivate those relationships. And the intent's not to make anybody feel inferior because they don't understand the TCP handshake or whatever you're talking about, right? I just think, but to your point, the communication element and the relationships there that you drive with that communication is so critical to any career, right? But I feel like especially in cybersecurity.
Yeah, that's something that we promote all the time, especially for those that are coming into the industry to I don't pick a topic of the week, do a blog, do an analysis on it. Not only do you
Yeah,
keep up with what's happening, but you can also then show that as a demonstration of your knowledge for leadership to see.
absolutely. And so if you're in a security position, maybe early career, and you're looking for that next promotion, find something that you did at work. Find an event you responded to, and work up a slide or two to show at your next team meeting or whatever however your team meetings work, right? If it's slides or whatever else, work up a short 5 or 10 minute presentation and talk about what you did, what happened, what you did, and how you resolve that problem. That's again a great way to build some of those public speaking skills. That's really important, and again develop that communication and be able to break it down into simple terms.
Are you saying that organizations run on PowerPoint?
Some slide format of your choice.
What are your thoughts on other intangibles that you could get from actionable reporting? Seems to be the button item that we're talking about here.
Yeah, I think the real key is to know who you're talking to, right? What is their perspective, and what is the message that you're trying to convey, right? What is if they have one thing to take away at the end of your 5, 10 minute, 30-minute speech, whatever it is, what is the message? What do you want them to do? And tell them that up front. Either this is just for your awareness, this is for your decision. We're going to ask you to make a decision at the end of this. We're asking for money, for a budget, for a program, or we want your guidance. We want your opinion on something. That's really, really key. And you've got to think about and understand their position and where they're coming from. And I've used HR or legal as another good example. You tell somebody in your legal team, hey, we've got a security event, just letting you know. And they're gonna like, oh my gosh, what's going on? Tell me everything. I'm like, well, hang on, no. Okay, I didn't communicate that clearly. Here's the issue right now. We believe we've got it under control. Think about how they're going to respond, and speak with your audience in mind. Again, and that's another case where you don't want to use big technical terms, because you do that and you're going to scare the socks off of anybody that you're talking to. So
Talking about big technical terms and words that have potentially different meanings across different groups, how do you ensure that you're communicating that proper message to different practices? That, for example, HR might have a meaning for a word, legal might have a meaning for a word, and security might have a slightly
yeah,
different meaning for that same word.
absolutely. And that's really challenging, right? And so in those cases, you just got to be super, super clear, and speak very plainly when it comes to that. If you can avoid defining the word with the word in it, right, that's always going to be a good thing. But if acronyms are a common way that people get things mixed up, right? And so don't use acronyms when you're communicating. Not in email. It's really easy to type it out. And if you do have slides, I don't know if anybody uses slides anymore or whatever. Uh, but cut out that. Be able for that document to stand alone all by itself. That doesn't require your talk track with it. So really, really try to break it down. And then, that might be a good instance where instead of sending an email, maybe you need to have a quick phone call. Maybe you need to talk through the issue rather than fire an email off and see what they come back with, right? So a lot of ways to communicate effectively. Slack messages or whatever kind of short message internal platform you're using. Sometimes those emotion and tone isn't conveyed well via just text alone. And so pick up the good old fashioned telephone, or have a call and talk through that.
Or add some gifs or some emojis
Yeah,
to
there you go.
to help ensure you're sending the
Add
same message.
add the right kind of emotion to it. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But you said a very critical point there with the documents to be able to stand alone without your talk track. I think that's often overlooked, that you shouldn't have to explain your document. And it's something that I still work on today.
Absolutely. It is a skill that for me is in constant refinement. So at the same time, the document needs to stand alone. It does not need to be a 5 paragraph essay on your slide that you're handing to your boss or your executive, right? It's got to be able to stand alone, but it also has to be clear and concise, because they're not going to sit there and read it all. They're going to ask you to come over and explain it to me anyway. So
So as you've spent all this time, you've recruited, you've interviewed, now you've hired someone. What do you do to create that pipeline of growth inside, both to keep them with your organization, but as well grow them within the organization?
yeah. So that's a great thought kind of exercise on how you do that, right? So you got through the hiring process, which in some cases can be really lengthy. Hopefully, you've got flexibility in your hiring, so you don't have to spend 6 months trying to hire, one person, right? That's also something that you should consider on as how long it takes you to hire people, because the longer it takes you to hire, the more difficult it is when somebody decides to leave, and move on to something else. And so you've got to have the right environment, across that pipeline, if you will. And I think one of the things that I try to do, and again, always trying to get better at this, but it's spend time with those individuals that are new to the team, right? And think about your team in terms of experience in two different ways. Um, their overall career experience, right? How long have they been doing X? How good are they at engineering or whatever the case may be? And then also look at their tenure in your organization. How well do they understand how the organization works? And so I think about that in those two different ways. And so one of the kind of informal programs that we do is we've got pairs of people who are entry, early career, that have been at the company their entire career, maybe 2, 3, 4 or 5 years, whatever the case may be. And then we've got senior people, as far as their career goes, that are more mid or later in their career, that have 10, 15 plus years of experience. And you can really pair those people up, because they're at two opposites, right? The experienced person who's brand new to the organization doesn't understand your business model, maybe, um, uh, and those are really critical things. And then obviously the more experience can teach and mentor from a technical perspective the younger folks or the less experienced people. Um, I think that's really I don't say misunderstood, but um, I think we could focus more on that, on securing the business, right? That's what we're there for, is to secure the organization and understand how they operate. I think that's really important. The other thing I think is just having clear communication on your team, right? If you're the leader, the manager, people should be able to bring a problem, bring a challenge to you. Um, and you certainly want to solve those problems at the right level and afford the managers the experience to solve those problems before you take it to a director. But don't let problems linger, right? They don't get better with age. So you got to have again, that kind of candid conversation model where you're willing to talk about whatever it is you want to talk about. You need that safe environment. And on that safety thread, I think the safety of the culture and the team, on, we're not here to point fingers when mistakes happen. We learn from mistakes. We don't make fun of people when they ask questions, right? Because we all, maybe more than one person has that question, and these are kind of overly simplified things, I think. But when you talk about it versus you actually do it, those are very, very impactful and powerful things that can really drive the healthy culture in your organization. And everybody has a voice, right? You want to be careful when you've got a big team. You probably have some people that are louder than others, and probably some people that kind of sit back and keep to themselves a little bit. You want to make sure everybody has an equal voice. Um, and that their voice and their concerns can be heard. I mean, I think that cultural element of the team is super critical to maintaining a good staff. You also want to look to having a balance of talent. And so I don't have a magic formula, but you don't want all of your individuals to be, senior 15, 20-year career employees. By the same token, you certainly don't want them to be all, green with less than 2 years of experience, right? And so you need the balance there to give the senior people the opportunity to mentor and coach the younger folks on your team and the less experienced team. And so, again, I don't have a magic formula. I wish I did. I could probably sell it and retire. Um, but but having those internal relationships across your team, make sure your SecOps or your DevSecOps team knows what happens on the engineering side or the incident response. Right? How do we write secure code, and how does that relate back to our incident response process? Develop those kind of cross-organizational relationships as well, and building that kind of framework is tough. It takes a lot of time, but I think you'll really see a lot of rewards when you take that approach to managing your team.
Nice, nice. I love that well-rounded approach, and I think one of the interesting aspects of that the senior junior mentorship pair is that the juniors can call out those "this is the way it's always been done" situations, because the seniors, that's how they've been doing it. Like
Yeah,
it's normal to them, it's a habit to them, and now someone with a fresh set of eyes can call out like, "Why are you doing it this way?" Or things have changed. Like, have you seen this new tool that this does this really cool thing that will help um, make that more efficient or whatever? And now you can have that fresh input from the juniors that
yeah.
have been maybe out there looking at the fresh tools to show, oh, this is where I can shine.
Absolutely. I think you hit on a great point, and I've even seen it to the feature level on a system. You've got somebody that has implemented the system in your environment, that platform, if they've run it and they've got it finely tuned, that's doing just what they want it to do. And then somebody new comes in and says, "Oh, what does that button do? Oh, we don't turn it on. We don't do that." Like, "Oh no, that's really cool. Hey, look, it just saved us, 2 hours worth of work. Oh, that's incredible, right?" So, fresh set of eyes is always valuable, no matter your experience level, no matter how much you know about the technology or whatever it is. So, and that goes back to having those open lines of communication and having that safe environment, so that individual feels empowered to speak up, and then that senior person can take that to heart and say, "Ah, gosh, you know what? I missed that. That's going to help drive me to be better." So, that's going to make the organization better all the way around.
But this is something that the military does very well. They take someone that has potentially a limited set of skills or no skills at all and teaches them a trade or a very finely tuned set of skills.
Mhm.
How can we implement such a structure like engineers do or nurses do in the cybersecurity world? Potentially an apprenticeship model. Like, how do you see that working within the private sector?
That's a great question. I think a lot of us are driven in our careers that we want to grow fast and quickly, and we want to climb whatever ladder it is. If your path is to principal or distinguished engineer, whatever your organization calls it, or a leader role type thing, or and there's a lot of different ways to do that. Um, I really feel like we have to be patient. You're not going to go from, maybe you do. There are going to be few people that go from SOC analyst to CISO in 5 years, or even 10 years, right? We have to be patient. We've got to um, really learn a lot about what you're doing, and don't just learn how to push the buttons on the technology or the system that you're doing. Learn what happens when you push the button. Why are you pushing that button, right? Don't just push the button and expect the output. um, I remember in school and learning, really complex math, and the teacher showed us the way you did it before calculators type thing, and it took like all class long to do this one simple problem, and then we learned the modern kind of shortcut way, and it's like, oh my gosh, that's so simple, but the experience of that, of seeing the step by step thing that happens, that's a really complicated process that we can distill down into take a 2-hour process and make it 2 seconds now. That's critical. But as practitioners, and to really, in my opinion, to do a really good job, we have to understand the underlying theory and foundation of what we're doing. And I will say, I think the military does that really well. They take, high school graduates, 18, 19, 20 years old, whatever, however old you are, whatever experience you've got. Um, and they teach you some of the fundamentals, at least in the IT world, of circuitry, how circuits work with electricity, transistors, resistors, the whole gamut. And they teach you the underlying things of how, which gives you some insight into why things are happening. And so you take that, and then you go learn how to you know uh, code a switch or a router, or a platform, right? Or write software. And so I think really having a fundamental understanding, to a deep understanding, is really important. Now that's not to say that every cyber position has to have years of training in electronic circuitry, or whatever, right? You don't have to necessarily have to know how to solder a circuit board, right? But I do think understanding at some level the underlying kind of theory, and the really foundational concepts. And foundations here does not mean the basics. It doesn't mean the 3-step method, right? Foundations is really the core of what we're doing. Whether that's in a risk program, looking at governance models and risk frameworks, or if you're looking at engineering, or data forensics, or whatever the case may be. So I really do think we need to be patient, and really develop some expertise, and not just search for the fastest career path to become a millionaire and retire at 35 or whatever. So
Well, you mentioned searching for the fastest career path from the candidate point of view, but what do you think about organizations that are solely looking for just that senior person and not willing to invest in them to grow so that they could, in theory, be up and running quickly?
yeah, so again, I would challenge you to look at your time to hire, and how long from the time you post a position to the time you actually have somebody starting. Um, you know, I would say you're doing pretty well if that's 1 to 2 months, right? That's gonna be pretty quick. If you can do it faster than that, great. I also think some of that goes back to the conversation we had a moment ago about having a balance of talent. You don't want everybody to be a senior person, because then it's going to get stale really quickly, I think. And you also want to offer people a path to promote, right? People are interested in that. I don't think you should expect a promotion every year or every 6 months or anything like that, right? Again, there are always exceptions to every rule. Um, but I think it's about having the right balance of talent, and really, and this is hard on all the way around, but to gauge the potential for your for your employees, and is that something they're interested in, right? And again, I'll go back to, why are they interested in it? Do they just want to hack stuff, or is there an underlying passion and drive to do that? And what is that? What's that motivation back there? And I think in many cases, um, companies think they're taking a risk on developing somebody versus trying to hire that talent. And I think there's a case to be made to go either way. But I really think, as an industry, as a cybersecurity field, we need to do a better job of developing our employees to become and help them see their potential at that next level of work. Again, whether that's an analyst to a lead, or engineer to senior lead, or distinguished or supervisory, or whatever the case may be. I think you've got to have a clear understanding of what you're looking for out of your team, and to do that. So it's
And
definitely complicated.
yeah, I would add, in addition to your time to hire, also calculate time to when you're fully on board, because there's your
Absolutely.
onboarding and ramp up time, which could add another 1 to 3 months, depending on how complex the skills are. So would it have been better to hire a junior and a mid instead of that one senior, and then you would have had not only resiliency in your team by having more people, but you also have additional variety and context on the team as well?
Absolutely. That's a fantastic point. Fantastic point.
Okay, as we approach the end, how do you work to develop leadership on your team? Because you're gonna find another role. You might want to retire. Like, how do you grow that resource now that's been in the organization to succeed you?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question, and one we don't talk about enough, right? Because in a lot of places, leaving an organization is just frowned upon, if you will, right? It happens all the time, but we don't like to talk about it, which is really kind of bizarre. So I think, as a leader, one of your core responsibilities is to help build that succession plan. What does that look like? And if only so you can take PTO every once in a while and have a vacation, right? Because who wants to get called when they're laying on the beach, whatever. So I think that is really important. And it's not just to that point. It's not just for when you leave, or win the lottery, or get hit by the bus, or whatever example you prefer. Um, and I think that's something that your leadership should really be focused on. Developing leaders also takes time. And I actually said it in a post earlier this morning, but leadership is not or leader is not a title. It is a thing that happens, and a thing that you do. So anybody on your team can be a leader, whether they are entry level, early career person, or they're the senior, CISO type security leader. And I think understanding that is really key. Um, as far as building that succession plan, to really develop those individuals, that does take some time. Again, you want to have a good plan around what their strengths are, areas for improvement they are, and then what opportunities occur in your organization to give them those opportunities to develop those skills. So if you're presenting, if you do an update to your executives, once a month or once a quarter, or whatever the time frame is, hand that off to your team. Let your lead engineer, or an engineering manager, take that presentation. Maybe you intentionally schedule it while you're out of the office, right? And so give them the chance to do that. You want to take those calculated risks, right? You don't want to send them. I wouldn't send a lead SOC analyst into the boardroom to make the quarterly update to the board, right? Don't do that. Um, but look for opportunities where you can give them what we call stretch assignments, and so it's a little bit out of their comfort zone. Don't leave them unprepared, right? But help guide them down that path. Help build the slide, or build the delivery, whatever the deliverable is, rather, and talk through that. And I think you can also look for projects in the organization that 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 span your team and span different organizations in the company, to give them some of that experience, right? Because as a team lead, or as a director, or as you go up, you're not just a leader over your team. You become a leader in the organization, and your voice carries weight across that organization. And so you've got to develop that. They have to have those relationships with legal, with HR, with whoever the team you're interacting with is. You definitely need those relationships, and they have to have those the ability and the time to do that. And I think that's one thing, or another thing rather, I should say, that we don't focus on enough, is building the relationships outside of our security team, or outside of IT even, because you think, oh, it's we're in IT, and a lot of us are in IT, and myself included, for good reason. There's some level of comfort I get behind sitting behind my screen, right? But I really challenge you to get up and walk around if you're out in the office, or call somebody that you haven't worked with lately, that's not on your team. Maybe they're in HR, contracts, or again, wherever. Um, Develop and cultivate those relationships, and make sure that you're introducing the folks on your team. So I've put a lot of this in the context of if you're a leader, do this. If you are not the leader in your office, in your team, then ask your leader to do this, right? Say, hey, how can I work with HR? How can I get to know the privacy folks? Maybe they're in the legal organization. How do we get to know them better? Because we're going to have to work closely together at some point. And you never want to make an introduction in the midst of a crisis. So that is always the worst time to introduce yourself to somebody. Say, hi, I'm Jonathan from the security team. We have an issue we need to handle. Oh, who are you again? You don't want to do that.
You touched on something that I was about to ask, and that's in regards to business enablement. Security is really a function of the business, because without the business, there's no need for us to be there. There's nothing
Absolutely.
to secure. So, how do you work to ensure that your teams understand what the business mission is, what the business does to produce value, and how they can truly work to not just enable that, but really allow it to become more efficient, to perform better while
Yes.
keeping it secure?
Yeah, so the main function of a security team is to protect revenue. Unless you're in a security product organization where you're building security products, that's a little different. Um, but you want to understand where your revenue comes from. You want to understand the systems that impact that revenue, the teams that are using those systems, um, and everybody on your team should be able to talk at some level about that, right? And understanding, and it's also good to have that kind of documentation somewhere of, hey, these are the critical systems, these are the ones we really need to care about. um, and so you take that, and again, that's where you give your team members opportunity to work in these kinds of projects. And you think about, how do we protect revenue? Well, you protect it by avoiding and defending against a ransomware attack, right? That's pretty obvious. But when you think about building secure code, right, doing that from scratch, from the beginning, early stages of code development, you think, oh, well, that's actually going to take time if we have to go rework code now, and delay the release, and maybe delay that new revenue stream that's coming out. But I would challenge you to look at it from the different perspective of, if we fix those bugs now, we're not going to have to do that later, and we can have a faster time to producing feature-rich applications that are going to help drive the business, that are going to give better metrics or make the process faster, whatever the case may be. So it's looking at it from creative ways. And I think one of the analogies that is often used is that the business is a race car, the IndyCar engine, right, and security is the brakes. And don't think about that as we're trying to keep the business from going forward. We're trying to help guide them and understand, hey, there's a risk coming up. Here's a corner. It's really tight. You need to hit the brakes a little bit so we don't run off the track. And so I think when you can take that perspective and build high quality security platforms with your customers in mind, it's going to make them a better security partner, because they're not going to try to find a way to work around security, right? They are going to incorporate it as a part of their process. And you need to understand what their daily processes are. and what their pain points are. A lot of times security professionals say, "Oh, you got to do it because I'm security and I said so." Like that's not the right answer. Um, we need or no, you can't do it at all because I said so. Right? That's the worst answer. Um, and we've got to find the ways to work with those organizations to uh, to understand again where are they coming from, what are they trying to achieve, and how can we help them do that quickly, efficiently, but also in a secure way that protects the organization and again protects the revenue that we're trying to drive.
Wow. That's so spot on. We have a great comment from one of our listeners. Ellie mentions, I'm from the SOC. Come with me, Mr. CEO, if you want to survive our disaster recovery plan," in the Terminator voice. But then they mentioned threat modeling early, fix terrible code in the future. That's true not just for code, but for any business process. I think
Yeah.
often we focus on threat modeling just for the code, but we have to threat model everything.
What can go wrong? Yeah,
Exactly.
absolutely.
In the process, in everything. And I think once we can do risk management with that threat model approach, it helps everyone. And if we can take in um, threat intelligence, risk informed decisions from everywhere, it just makes things so much easier.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Identify risks up front and figure out what you need to do with them. Whether you can offload it, you need to fix it somehow, or you can ignore it. Maybe. Who knows?
Or just accept it
Yeah.
and be prepared to write
Accept
that
it,
check
not
when it
ignore.
happens.
Yeah, thank you. Don't ignore risks. You might decide to accept them and then write that down and make sure the right person has accepted that risk, so you're not accepting a risk on behalf of your company.
I mean, you can ignore it, but it
I
could
wouldn't
come and bite
recommend it.
you. Exactly, exactly. So, Jonathan, we're coming around to the end. Let's pretend this is the future. Someone else is watching this in the future, and they want to become a leader, just like you. What advice would you give them?
Develop relationships. Relationships are based on trust and communication, and you've got to have authentic relationships. There's a lot of talk now about return to office and in a almost post-COVID world. I mean, COVID's still a thing. It's kind of heating up again, so it's off and on and off again. I think really focus on developing those relationships, whether you're in person or if you're interacting over a some sort of collaboration platform. You've got to have relationships to do that and to build that influence. And I think the best way to do that is to put yourself out there, volunteer for things that might be a little bit uncomfortable. Talk to your manager, your leader about that. Find a mentor that has been there and can help guide you on that path. There's a lot of ways, but also I think it's be patient, right? You've got the worst thing that can happen to you is, hey, I want to be a leader, and you get put into a management or some sort of leadership position before you're ready, and then you fail, and it can be really hard to come back from that. That's not to scare anybody off, but just be cognizant of what you're asking for, and really have some very candid, down to earth conversations. Um, I love my job. I love what I do in my career that I've chosen. It's not always easy. It's not always stress free. But I again, and actually kind of circling back to the initial one of the initial comments we talked about was understand why you want to do it, and why do you want to be a leader. What is it about that can drive that, and also understand that just because you're a leader doesn't mean you have to wear a hat that says you're the director or the CISO or the CEO or whoever else, right? We need authentic leaders across the board, and you can do that from whatever chair you're sitting in right now.
Well, perfect. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for another CISO Thursday. Follow us on LinkedIn, subscribe and hit that notification button on YouTube, and then give us those 10 stars on your favorite podcast platform and share us with your friends and family. Thank you very much and have a great day.